Story number 1. They were just having dinner, a normal evening, like any other. But by the time the sun rose, only one of them was left alive. The town of Crestwood was small and quiet, the kind of place where people left their doors unlocked and knew their neighbors by name. It sat between wide fields and calm woods, a perfect place to raise a family. The Wilson family had lived there for 8 years. James and Lisa, both in their early 40s, were kind, hardworking parents. Their 3 children, Emily, 14, Ryan, 11, and little Sophie, only 6, were happy, active, and well-known at school. The family had a daily routine filled with laughter, chores, and family dinners around the same wooden table. That Friday evening was supposed to be like every other. James grilled burgers outside while Lisa helped Sophie with her homework. Emily texted friends about a weekend movie night, and Ryan was busy playing video games. Nothing strange, nothing unusual. Neighbors would later say they heard laughter, music, and the scent of food drifting from the open kitchen window. Everything felt normal, peaceful. But just after 10 p.m., the lights in the house suddenly went out. The laughter stopped. No one noticed anything at first. People thought maybe they had just gone to bed early. But the next morning, something felt off. The Wilsons never missed Saturday breakfast at the local diner. When they didn't show up, one of the neighbors went to check. The front door was unlocked. The house was quiet. Inside, the house looked undisturbed. The dishes from dinner were still in the sink. A board game lay halfway played on the living room rug. But something felt wrong. Too quiet, too still. The neighbor stepped farther in and noticed a trail of something dark on the floor, leading toward the hallway. Panic set in. By the time the police arrived, they found the unimaginable. 4 members of the family were dead. Only Ryan, the middle child, had survived. He was hiding in a small closet, shaking and silent, too afraid to speak. No one could explain what had happened. There were no signs of forced entry, no clear suspects, and no motive. A happy family, gone in one night, and no answers. Something terrible had happened in that quiet house, and the only one who knew what it was an 11-year-old boy. Ryan sat silently in the hospital room, wrapped in a blanket, his eyes wide and distant. He hadn't spoken a single word since being found. No one could imagine what he had seen or heard inside that house. The officers who found him said he was curled up in the back of the hallway closet, shaking with his hands over his ears. He didn't cry, didn't scream, just sat there in complete silence. At first, the doctors and detectives gave him time. They didn't want to push too hard. They knew trauma like his needed patience. A child had just lost his entire family in a single night. Slowly, with gentle care and therapy, Ryan began to talk. Not all at once, just small pieces, quiet sentences, 1 or 2 words. He remembered sitting on the couch that night with his sister Emily, playing a game. He said he heard the doorbell ring. His dad went to answer it. A man was at the door, someone his dad seemed to know. Ryan said the man sounded angry. There was shouting, then a loud noise like something breaking. That's when his mother screamed. Ryan froze. His sister grabbed his hand, but before they could move, the man stormed into the living room. Ryan couldn't describe the man's face clearly, just that he wore dark clothes and his voice was low and threatening. Everything happened so fast. He saw the man push Emily, then heard his mom yelling from the kitchen. He didn't remember running, but somehow he ended up in the hallway closet. He closed the door and stayed quiet. From inside, he heard more shouting, then a loud thud, and another, then nothing. Silence. Ryan stayed hidden for hours, afraid the man was still there. He said he counted in his head to keep calm. He didn't sleep. He didn't move. He just waited for someone to come. His story was heartbreaking, but it gave police something to work with. It confirmed that someone had come to the house, someone known to the family, someone who turned violent very suddenly. For the first time, the investigators had a timeline and a description, even if only partial. It was a small step, but one that could lead to the truth behind that terrible night. The police walked through the house carefully, eyes scanning every surface, every corner. What they found confused everyone. The front door was locked, so was the back door. Every window was intact. There were no signs of forced entry at all. It was as if the killer had walked in like any guest, or maybe even used a key. Most of the house was perfectly clean and in order. The living room was untouched. Cushions on the couch still in place. Remote on the coffee table, nothing knocked over. The hallway looked just as it would on any normal day, but two areas stood out. First was the master bedroom. The bed was slightly pulled from the wall, and there were signs of a struggle near the dresser. Clothes had been pulled out of a drawer, and a lamp was on the floor, shattered. There were small drops of blood near the doorway, leading toward the bed. Officers believed the parents were attacked there first, but there were no fingerprints on the lamp, the dresser, or even the door handle. The second area was the kitchen. Drawers were slightly open. A chair was knocked over. A few dishes were broken on the floor. Blood smeared across one of the cabinet doors. But again, no fingerprints. No murder weapon left behind. No signs of anything being stolen. All the cash, jewelry, and electronics were untouched. This didn't look like a robbery gone wrong. It looked personal, calculated, quiet. The way the victims were killed also raised questions. There was no loud gunshot heard by the neighbors, no calls for help, just silence. That suggested a close-range attack, most likely with a sharp object or blunt force. Whoever did this was calm, controlled. They knew exactly what they were doing. That made everything more chilling. Police began to wonder, was the killer someone the family knew? Maybe even someone they trusted enough to let into the house without worry. The fact that there was no forced entry and nothing missing pointed to something far deeper than random violence. The details of the crime scene turned the investigation in a new direction. This wasn't about money or rage. It felt like a message. But what kind of message? And why this family were questions that remained unanswered. As police expanded their search beyond the immediate crime scene, they began reviewing the family's background. Nothing stood out at first. They had no enemies, no legal issues, no ties to criminal activity. But a detail from nearly 2 years ago slowly resurfaced, something almost forgotten. A former neighbor, Thomas Rayleigh, had once lived 2 houses down from the victims. He was quiet, kept to himself, but many neighbors remembered a small legal dispute between him and the victim's father. Apparently, there had been an issue with a shared fence. Tensions had escalated, and the father ended up testifying in court. The ruling had not gone in Thomas's favor. Afterward, he lost the case, struggled financially, and within months, he lost his job and eventually his house. Many dismissed it as coincidence, unfortunate events that had piled up. But investigators couldn't ignore the possibility of a grudge, especially after learning that Thomas had been seen walking through the area just weeks before the murders. No one thought much of it at the time. He had told people he was visiting a friend nearby. But when detectives looked into it, no such friend existed on that street. Police then turned to security footage from homes nearby. One camera caught a blurry figure walking past the house late in the evening on the night of the crime. The image quality was poor, and the person's face wasn't clear, but the frame matched Thomas's build and the way he walked, according to one neighbor. Phone records showed another clue. On the night of the murders, Thomas's phone had pinged off a tower just 4 blocks from the house. He claimed he had been out taking a walk to clear his mind. But the timing was strange. It placed him in the area at the exact window when the murders happened. When questioned, Thomas remained calm. He denied any involvement. He admitted to being bitter about the past but claimed he had moved on. Without a clear motive or direct evidence tying him to the scene, the case remained frustratingly out of reach. He was not arrested. Still, the connection raised suspicion and added another layer to an already disturbing mystery. The idea that an old grudge might have led to the brutal deaths of 5 people made the case even darker. The arrest shocked the community. Many remembered Thomas Rayleigh as a quiet man who mostly kept to himself. But when the investigation reached a turning point, authorities had gathered just enough evidence to bring him in. Police searched a storage unit he had been renting under a different name. Inside, they found old tools, personal items, and something far more disturbing, sketches that matched the layout of the victim's home. Each drawing showed different rooms, with handwritten notes next to them. There were markings near doors and windows, and short sentences like easy access, quietest window, and must act fast. These were not harmless doodles. They appeared to be detailed plans. Alongside the drawings, police uncovered a small leather-bound journal. The journal had dozens of entries, but one stood out. It read like a confession, though never mentioning names. It talked about betrayal, justice, and restoring balance. In one chilling passage, he wrote about a house full of silence, and 5 souls paid, 1 remained. Investigators instantly connected that line to the crime scene where 5 victims were found, and 1 child had miraculously survived. At the trial, the defense tried to argue that the journal was just fiction, a way for Thomas to vent his emotions. They claimed he had been under mental stress after losing his job and home. His lawyer insisted that there was no physical evidence tying him to the murders. No fingerprints, no DNA, no eyewitnesses. But the prosecution focused on the patterns. The journal mentioned specific things that had never been made public, like the brand of cereal left half-eaten in the kitchen, and the fact that the front porch light had been broken for weeks. These were details only someone familiar with the family or the crime scene would know. The drawings and journal, combined with his phone location and past tension with the victim's father, painted a clear picture for the jury. Even without direct physical evidence, the circumstantial proof was overwhelming. When the verdict was read, the courtroom fell silent. Guilty on all counts. The only sound was the quiet sobbing of the surviving child's grandmother. Thomas showed no emotion, no apology, no explanation, just silence, as though the years he had waited in the shadows had finally reached their end. The surviving child was placed with close relatives in a different town, far from the house that once held every memory of his family. He didn't speak much at first. The trauma had settled deep, and no words could explain what he had seen or how it felt to wake up to silence and flashing lights. Therapists worked with him gently. Progress came slowly, but it came. He began drawing, expressing his feelings in pictures rather than words. Over time, his sketches became a way for people to understand his pain and strength. A group of local volunteers, moved by the tragedy, raised funds to build a small memorial garden in the town. It stood in a quiet park, just a few blocks from the family's old home. In the garden, 5 trees were planted, each with a nameplate for one of the victims. A bench sat in the center, engraved with a simple phrase, "Gone, not forgotten." Every year on the anniversary of the crime, people gathered there. Some left flowers, some stayed in silence, and others prayed. It became a place of comfort for a community that had been deeply shaken. The boy, now a teenager, still doesn't speak publicly. He has never given interviews or shared his story with reporters. But every year he writes one letter. He sends it to the detective who stayed on the case from the start. The letter never includes much, just a few lines, but it always ends the same way. "I survived, but they never leave me." His words carry weight, proof that pain lingers, but so does memory. People say he's doing well in school. He volunteers at shelters and wants to study psychology. Maybe to help others the way others helped him. The tragedy left deep scars, but it also created a quiet strength in him. He carries their memory not with fear, but with purpose. This case reminds everyone that even in the darkest times, there's a light that can carry forward. It also reminds us to be present, to check on our neighbors, and to listen to those who may be silently hurting. Because sometimes the strongest people are the ones who live on, carrying the weight of stories that must never be forgotten. Story number 2. It was a peaceful neighborhood where nothing ever happened. Families felt safe enough to leave their doors unlocked, and children played outside until the sun went down. Everyone knew everyone, and the streets were filled with laughter and trust. It was the kind of place where crime seemed like something that only happened on the news. Not here. The Johnson family lived on one of those quiet streets. They had 2 young children, ages 4 and 7, and were known in the community as kind, friendly people. Like many parents, they relied on a trusted babysitter when they needed a night out. That sitter was Emily, 17 years old, responsible, and loved by the kids. She had been babysitting for them for over a year without a single issue. The kids adored her, and the parents had complete confidence in her. It was a rainy Friday night. The clouds had rolled in just before dinner, and a light drizzle tapped against the windows. The Johnsons had dinner plans with friends across town. Emily arrived just before 6 p.m., umbrella in hand, and greeted the kids with a warm smile. She brought over a movie for them to watch and promised popcorn after they ate their dinner. Everything seemed ordinary. By 6:30 p.m., the Johnsons had left, reminding Emily to call if she needed anything. Emily waved goodbye as she closed the door, then turned to the children, ready for another quiet evening. They had pizza, watched cartoons, and went to bed just after 9 p.m., tucked in with their favorite stuffed animals and nightlights glowing softly. But when the parents returned shortly after midnight, something didn't feel right. Front door was unlocked. The living room light was still on. The TV was off and the house was silent. The children were sound asleep in their beds, undisturbed. But Emily was nowhere to be found. Her coat still hung by the door. Her shoes were still by the mat. Her phone was sitting on the kitchen counter, screen dark and untouched. The doors were locked from the inside. There was no note, no signs of distress or struggle. Just emptiness. It was like she had vanished into thin air. What started as a normal evening ended with a chilling mystery, one that would haunt the family and the entire neighborhood for years to come. The Johnsons stepped inside their quiet home with the feeling that something was wrong. At first, they assumed Emily might be in the bathroom or maybe checking on the kids upstairs. The house was quiet, but not unusually so. They called out her name a few times, expecting a quick response. When no one answered, they checked every room in the house. The bathroom was empty. The guest room, untouched. The back door was locked from the inside. They even checked the backyard, thinking maybe she had stepped out for a call or some fresh air. But there was no sign of her. Her shoes were still neatly placed near the door, and her coat was still hanging on the hook. Her bag was on the kitchen counter, right beside her phone. The screen was black, untouched, and when they tried to call it, it didn't ring. It just vibrated slightly, sitting right there in plain view. That was the moment their worry turned into fear. Within minutes, panic started to set in. The parents checked the kids again. Both were sleeping peacefully, unaware of anything unusual. It was as if Emily had simply vanished without a trace. There were no signs of struggle, no mess, no broken furniture or open windows. Everything was in place, except Emily was gone. By 1 a.m., they called the police. Officers arrived quickly and began checking the house and surrounding area. A missing person report was filed immediately. When they reached out to Emily's family, her mother answered the phone with confusion that quickly turned into horror. Emily had left the house earlier that evening in good spirits. She was excited about the babysitting job and had even talked about what movie she planned to watch with the kids. She had never run away before, had no history of mental health concerns, and hadn't mentioned any problems at school or with friends. She wasn't the type of girl to just disappear. As the police asked more questions, the confusion only deepened. Her personal belongings were all still in the house. Her wallet, her ID, and even the house key the family had given her were untouched. The rain had continued lightly throughout the evening, but there were no muddy footprints or signs anyone had entered or exited. It was as if she had simply stopped existing. Investigators searched every inch of the Johnsons' home for any sign that could explain what happened to Emily. They started with the basics, checking the doors and windows, looking for anything out of place. The back door was locked from the inside, just like the family had said. Upstairs, the children's room looked perfectly normal. Toys neatly placed, beds made with care, and both children asleep when their parents arrived. Emily had even tucked them in, as the kids later recalled. They said they had dinner with her, watched one cartoon, then went to bed. Nothing felt off to them. No loud noises, no visitors. Just a quiet evening. The police turned to the security cameras in the area, hoping something might reveal a clue. But the street was calm that night. None of the cameras had a view of the house's side entrance, and the few that showed the street saw nothing unusual. Just a few passing cars and distant porch lights flickering. There was no sign of anyone entering or leaving the property around the time Emily vanished. They interviewed the neighbors. Most hadn't seen or heard anything strange. A couple living next door mentioned seeing Emily arrive around 6 and remembered hearing laughter from the kids during the evening. After that, silence. No screams, no car engines, no footsteps, nothing that would raise alarm. When the forensic team came in, they dusted for fingerprints and scanned the house carefully. But all they found were the expected ones: Emily's, the children's, and the Johnsons'. No unknown prints, no signs of forced entry, no broken locks or scratches on windowsills. Every drawer and cabinet in the home was exactly where it should be. Her purse still had money inside. Her phone had no recent messages or strange calls. One thing did stand out: a kitchen window that had been slightly open. At first, it seemed like it could be a way in or out. But there was no mud on the windowsill, no smudges, no signs of it being touched. The screen was still in place. Forensics found it undisturbed. It was likely just left open for air, as the family often did during mild evening. With no signs of a struggle, no digital trail, and no useful eyewitness accounts, every clue seemed to lead to a dead end. The mystery only grew darker. As investigators searched for answers, they began to look into Emily's personal life more closely. Friends and co-workers shared that in the weeks before her disappearance, Emily hadn't been acting like herself. She had seemed distracted, sometimes nervous, and often looked over her shoulder when walking alone. At first, her friends thought she was just stressed from work and school, but a few of them remembered she had started texting someone frequently. When asked, none of them knew exactly who she was talking to. The name didn't match anyone in her usual circle. Using her cloud backup, police were able to recover some of her deleted messages. A few of them raised serious concerns. In one message, she said she felt like someone was watching her. In another, she wrote that she was tired of hiding and just wanted to feel safe again. The last saved message, written 2 days before she vanished, simply read, "If something happens to me, it's not random." That single line made it clear to investigators that Emily had been afraid. But who or what she was afraid of remained unclear. The phone number she had been texting came from a prepaid device, making it nearly impossible to trace. The user never responded to police attempts to contact them. The last text from that number was sent the evening Emily disappeared. It read, "Are you ready?" and was never answered. Neighbors told police that a man had been seen loitering near the Johnsons' house earlier that week. He hadn't done anything threatening, but he was there more than once, usually around the same time Emily would arrive to babysit. He didn't speak to anyone and left before anyone could get a good look at him. His face was partly hidden by a hoodie, and the camera footage from the area was too grainy to help identify him. With no name and no clear reason for Emily's fear, detectives were left trying to connect dots between her growing anxiety and this unknown figure. It was becoming more likely that Emily had known whoever was involved in her disappearance. Whether she left the house on her own or was forced to, it seemed she had been preparing for something, or someone, for weeks. Emily's parents refused to give up, even when it felt like the world was moving on. From the very next day after she disappeared, they printed hundreds of posters with her photo and contact information. They handed them out on street corners, taped them to shop windows, and placed them at every gas station and community center they could find. People from the neighborhood joined them, forming search groups that walked through wooded areas, parks, and abandoned buildings. But each search ended the same way, without answers. Desperate for more help, Emily's family hired a private investigator. He looked through her school records, phone logs, and social media accounts. He even traveled to nearby towns to follow up on reported sightings. In one town, a waitress thought she had seen a girl matching Emily's description eating alone in a diner. In another, a gas station clerk claimed a quiet young woman bought snacks and seemed in a hurry. But none of the tips led to her. Every time hope started to grow, it was quickly replaced with disappointment. As the weeks turned into months, leads began to fade. Law enforcement resources were pulled back, and the case became just another open file on a long list of missing persons. But for Emily's family, time only made things harder. Her room stayed exactly as she left it, untouched except for the dust that settled on her desk. Her mother still checked her email, hoping for some sign, some message, anything. Rumors spread around the town. Some people believed Emily had run away, that maybe she had a secret life no one knew about. Others whispered darker theories, suggesting she had been taken by someone who had been watching her for a long time. The truth remained buried in silence. The children she had been babysitting were young, but they remembered her clearly. They often asked when Emily was coming back, why she had left without saying goodbye. One of them even drew her a picture months later and taped it to the front door. For them, Emily wasn't just the babysitter, she was their friend, the person who made them laugh and feel safe. Years passed, but her family still hoped. Every birthday, every holiday, every quiet evening felt incomplete. Emily's name remained on missing persons lists, her case still open. But the question that haunted everyone remained the same. How could someone vanish without a trace? Years went by, but the pain never left. Emily's room stayed just as she had left it. Bed neatly made, books still stacked by her nightstand, and her favorite hoodie hanging on the back of the door. Her parents refused to believe she was gone forever. They held on to every memory, every moment, and every hope that one day she would walk through the door again. Birthdays came and went, holidays felt quieter, but their determination never faded. The town changed over time, but Emily's disappearance never stopped being a topic of quiet conversation. People still remembered the night she vanished. The street where the family lived gained a strange stillness after that. Neighbors who once left their doors unlocked became more cautious. Families kept their children closer. The case had left a mark that time couldn't erase. Years after the incident, something unexpected happened. Another teenager in a nearby town went missing under strangely similar circumstances. The girl had been walking home in the evening, not far from where Emily was last seen. She vanished without warning. No struggle, no clues, just silence. The eerie resemblance to Emily's case caught the attention of a young detective who had recently joined the force. He began revisiting old files, questioning retired officers, and digging into evidence that had long been stored away. The detective noticed strange overlaps, unanswered calls from blocked numbers, reports of a dark-colored vehicle near both scenes, and similarities in the victims' routines. It wasn't enough to solve the case, but it was enough to raise new questions. Perhaps the person responsible had stayed hidden all this time, blending in, waiting. Emily's family felt a mix of sadness and renewed hope. Maybe someone out there still remembered something. Maybe the past wasn't completely buried. Her case, once cold, had found new life. Today, Emily's disappearance remains one of the most unsettling mysteries in the town's history. People still pass by the house and wonder what truly happened that night. The case reminds everyone that sometimes answers hide in plain sight, just waiting for the right moment to be uncovered. If you know anything about what happened to Emily, no matter how small it may seem, please come forward. Even the tiniest detail might be the key to solving this case and giving a family the closure they've waited so long to find. Story number 3. In the summer of 1999, the town of Elmridge was peaceful, the kind of place where people didn't lock their doors and neighbors knew each other by name. Surrounded by dense green forest, the town was small, quiet, and safe, until one day when everything changed. That day, a young woman named Lauren Foster disappeared, and Elmridge would never feel the same again. Lauren was 22 years old. She had just graduated from a nearby college and moved back home to live with her parents while applying for jobs. People described her as kind, responsible, and full of dreams. She often went on morning walks near the edge of the forest, enjoying the peace it brought her. On the morning of August 4th, Lauren told her mom she'd be back in an hour. She wore a simple blue hoodie, black leggings, and white sneakers. The sky was clear, the sun was soft, and there was no reason to expect anything unusual. Hours passed, and Lauren didn't return. Her mom tried calling her phone, but it went straight to voicemail. At first, the family thought she may have taken a longer route or bumped into someone she knew, but by the afternoon, worry turned into panic. The police were called, and within hours, a search team was formed. Local volunteers, firefighters, and officers gathered at the forest's edge, calling her name and combing through the trails. No one could believe it. People in Elmridge didn't just disappear. The forest that once felt calming now seemed darker. The trees stood still, but they gave off an eerie silence. Lauren's family begged the media for help. Flyers were posted across town, and her story quickly spread through news outlets. But despite the quick response, not a single trace of Lauren was found. No footprints, no clothing, no signs of struggle, just emptiness where she once was. The forest had swallowed something whole. Families who once let their kids run freely now kept them indoors. A deep fear crept through the streets, and that once friendly town began locking its doors. Everyone was asking the same question. How could someone vanish without a single clue? For the first time, Elmridge felt unsafe. The forest had kept its calm look, but inside it was hiding something it didn't want to give back. The search for Lauren began the same afternoon she went missing. Volunteers lined up at the edge of the forest, determined to bring her home. Police officers, forest rangers, and neighbors worked side by side. Search dogs were brought in to pick up her scent, and helicopters circled above the thick tree canopy, hoping to spot any sign of movement or color that could lead to her. Every known path, hidden trail, and open clearing was walked again and again. They even checked the small streams and shallow ponds that dotted the forest, but nothing turned up. Lauren's parents stood at the front of every search group. Her mother called, her name with hope, refusing to believe her daughter could be gone. Her father handed out water to volunteers and tried to stay strong, though his hands trembled constantly. Friends posted flyers in every nearby town, and people who didn't even know Lauren came to help. The entire community felt the weight of her disappearance. It wasn't just about one missing girl anymore. It was about the safety of everyone. As the days passed, the energy in Elmridge shifted. The town that once felt so connected began to unravel. People started locking their doors and watching their backs. Families stopped letting their children out alone. Trust between neighbors began to fade. What if someone among them knew something? What if the danger hadn't left with Lauren? Each search day ended the same way, with nothing. No footprints, no broken branches, no torn fabric. Even the dogs lost her scent within the first hour. It was like she had been lifted from the ground and taken without a trace. It didn't make sense. She was healthy, alert, and always cautious. The forest was her comfort place, not somewhere she feared. With no physical evidence to explain her disappearance, police started considering darker possibilities. They interviewed everyone Lauren had seen recently. Her old teachers, her classmates, the man who sold coffee down the road. Still, there were no suspects. No one had seen or heard anything strange that morning. Every lead went cold. Rumors started, whispers spread, and fear grew. The idea that someone had taken Lauren and hidden her so well chilled everyone to the core. As weeks turned into months, the silence around Lauren's case grew heavier. Without answers, people in the town began filling the gaps with their own ideas. Whispers passed through coffee shops, murmurs floated around grocery store aisles, and online forums lit up with theories. Everyone had something to say, but no one had proof. Some believed Lauren had chosen to disappear. They pointed to the way she had seemed distracted in the weeks before she vanished, claiming she might have been planning something. A few classmates said she had been writing in a notebook a lot, always closing it quickly when someone walked by. Others argued that Lauren wasn't the type to run away. She was close with her parents, loved her routine, and had made plans for the summer. Attention turned toward people she knew. Some began to question her boyfriend at the time. He had seemed devastated at first, but later, someone noticed he stopped showing up to the search efforts. Others claimed he was acting strange, avoiding eye contact or changing the subject when Lauren's name came up. Then there was her best friend, who suddenly stopped posting on social media altogether. When asked, she said the attention was too much to handle, but that didn't stop the speculation. One of the strangest stories came from an old neighbor. He said he'd seen someone walking near the edge of the forest late that morning, someone in dark clothing, not part of the usual trail crowd, but his statement didn't lead anywhere. Still, it added fuel to the fire. As the mystery dragged on, people began to bring up the legend of Elmridge Forest. Older residents remembered stories from their childhood, tales of people who wandered into the woods and never came back. They talked about strange sounds, shadows that didn't match the trees, and places where the air felt too still. No one had ever taken those stories seriously until now. Even with all the rumors and eerie stories, detectives tried to keep things grounded. They followed each new tip, rechecked timelines, and reviewed phone records. But every promising lead faded away. Each trail they followed ended where it had started, with Lauren gone and no clear path to find her. Lauren's family refused to let her name be forgotten. Every year on the anniversary of her disappearance, they organized a candlelight vigil in the town square. Dozens of people gathered, holding candles and pictures of Lauren, sharing memories and offering prayers. Her parents printed flyers with her photo and contact numbers, placing them on bulletin boards in store windows, and even mailing them to nearby towns. Her mother started a blog, writing letters to Lauren and sharing updates on the case, hoping someone, somewhere, might read it and remember something important. Her father met with police regularly, asking about updates and offering to help. He never stopped pushing for answers. Whenever there was a new detective assigned to the case, he made sure they understood Lauren's story. Not just the details of the investigation, but who she was as a person. He believed that someone who truly knew Lauren might see something others had missed. Investigators revisited the case every few years, especially when new forensic tools became available. They sent items from the original search, clothing, hairbrushes, even Lauren's cell phone case, to updated labs, hoping something new could be discovered. Sometimes the detectives received calls from people who had just heard about the case or thought they saw something related. Most of the time, those tips led nowhere, but every message was followed up. In the neighborhood where Lauren grew up, things slowly changed. Some families moved away, needing a fresh start away from the constant reminder of what had happened. New families moved in, unaware of the story behind the house at the end of the road, but others stayed. They still remembered the search teams, the sound of helicopters overhead, and the way the forest seemed to hold its breath during those first terrifying days. Over time, life in the town returned to a kind of normal. Kids played in the parks again, the high school held its events, and the trails in the forest reopened. But for those who remembered Lauren, there was always something missing. Her face stayed on the bulletin board at the grocery store, and her name came up whenever someone new asked about local legends. Though time had passed, the question still lingered. How could someone disappear so completely, and why hadn't they been found? For 20 years, the forest remained quiet, untouched in places where few people dared to go. It was thick with trees and silence, a place known for winding trails and long shadows. Then in late spring, a man hiking deep into the forest followed an overgrown path he hadn't taken before. It led him to a small hidden clearing, one that didn't appear on any of the park's official maps. At first, the hiker thought he'd discovered an old campsite. The area was strangely flat, and parts of the soil looked disturbed, as though someone had once dug there. As he walked further, something caught his eye. A piece of faded fabric was poking out from the dirt, tangled in roots and half buried under leaves. It didn't look like trash or something dropped by mistake. It had been there a long time. The hiker marked the spot and reported it when he got back to the ranger station. Soon, local police arrived, followed by a full forensic team. They carefully cleared the area, removing layers of soil with precision. What they uncovered confirmed what many had feared for years: human remains. Nearby, there were personal items as well: a broken necklace, a rusted key, and what appeared to be the remains of a torn backpack. The discovery sent shockwaves through the town. The remains were taken for testing, and within a few days, forensic results provided a heartbreaking answer. The body belonged to Lauren, the woman who had vanished in 1999 without a trace. After so many years of not knowing, her family finally had confirmation. She had died in the same forest that had been searched countless times. What stood out even more was what else was found. Near the remains, investigators discovered a small, weather-worn notebook. The pages were damaged by time, but some words were still readable. It wasn't clear if it had been Lauren's or someone else's. Some pages seemed to contain names, dates, and references to places nearby. The notebook raised many questions. Why had it been left there? Who had written in it? And most of all, was it a clue to what happened? This discovery didn't just bring closure, it reopened the case completely. Investigators believed that whoever had been involved might have returned later to hide or leave something. After 20 years, the forest had finally given up its secret, but the mystery was far from over. After 2 decades of unanswered questions, new forensic technology finally changed everything. Scientists were able to extract a clean DNA profile from a piece of fabric found near the buried remains. That sample was then matched against a national database. To everyone's surprise, the match wasn't a new offender. It was someone who had been questioned during the original investigation 20 years earlier. The man's name was Richard Hale, a local handyman who had lived just outside the town back then. He had been interviewed once during the first few days of Lauren's disappearance, mainly because he had done some odd jobs near her house. But he had no criminal record at the time and gave what seemed like a believable story. With no hard evidence linking him to the case, police let him go. Now, with the DNA match, authorities had the break they needed. Richard was arrested at his home, living quietly in another state under a different name. During questioning, he didn't deny the evidence. Slowly, over several hours, he gave a full confession. He admitted that he had seen Lauren the night she disappeared. According to his story, it started as a conversation that turned into an argument. But the truth was much darker than anyone expected. He had taken her into the forest, where he believed no one would ever find her. Then he left her there and walked away, convinced that time would erase the crime. His calm tone while describing the events shocked everyone involved in the case. He showed no emotion, no regret, only facts. The details he shared matched perfectly with what was found at the scene. The notebook, the disturbed ground, the personal items, all of it now made sense. Forensic experts were able to confirm that Richard's prints were on several of the items recovered. There was no room for doubt. The town struggled to process the news. People who had known Richard as a neighbor or co-worker were horrified. Lauren's family, though heartbroken, felt some peace knowing what happened. They had waited so long for the truth, and now at last they could bury their daughter properly, knowing her story had been told. If there's one lesson to carry from this, it's this. Always speak up if something feels wrong. Never ignore your instincts. And if someone you love is still missing, keep fighting for answers. Time may bury secrets, but truth always finds its way back. Story number 4. It was the kind of neighborhood people dreamed of living in. Lined with trees that bloomed in spring and shaded in summer, the street felt calm and safe. The houses were well kept, their lawns always neat, with children riding bikes and neighbors stopping to chat. Everyone knew each other by name. Birthdays were celebrated together, and holidays brought lights and laughter. It was a place where doors were left unlocked during the day, and no one ever thought twice about walking alone after dark. When Emma and Daniel moved into the house on the corner, they were welcomed with smiles, cookies, and handshakes. It was their first home as a married couple, and they couldn't believe how perfect everything felt. Among the many neighbors who stopped by, one stood out more than the rest, Mr. Lawson, who lived right next door. He was in his late 50s, always wearing a clean button-up shirt, and his small talk was friendly and warm. He offered help with moving boxes, gave gardening tips, and even brought over his old tools when Daniel needed them. At first, Emma thought he was just a kind old man who had too much free time. But little things started to feel strange. Mr. Lawson always seemed to be watching. His blinds would move slightly when someone walked by, and he always seemed to know who had visitors, what time they left, and where people were going. He asked questions that felt just a little too personal. What time Emma left for work, whether Daniel would be out of town again, how long they'd be gone during a weekend trip. Still, no one thought anything of it. In a neighborhood so peaceful, it was easy to brush off small oddities. People just said Mr. Lawson was lonely. He had lived alone since his wife passed away, and maybe he just liked to stay connected. After all, he'd lived on that street for over 20 years. If anyone knew the neighborhood, it was him. Emma and Daniel went back to their routines, comforted by the quiet safety of the area. But they didn't realize that the comfort they felt was built on trust, and sometimes trust is the most dangerous thing to give. Emma's disappearance didn't make sense to anyone. She had gone out for her usual morning jog, just like she always did around 6:30 a.m. It was part of her daily routine, something she never skipped. But that morning she didn't return. By 8 a.m., Daniel began to worry. He called her phone, but it went straight to voicemail. At first he tried not to panic. Maybe her phone had died. Maybe she bumped into a friend and got caught up in conversation. But as the minutes turned into hours, Daniel knew something was wrong. He called the police just before 10 a.m. Officers arrived and began asking questions. They checked local parks and walking paths. Neighbors were quick to respond and form small search parties. People combed the streets, peered through bushes, and called her name through quiet roads and nearby trails. Mr. Lawson, the friendly neighbor next door, was one of the first to show up at Daniel's door. He seemed genuinely concerned, offering to help organize the search. He brought coffee to the officers and offered maps of the area. He asked detailed questions about the last time anyone saw Emma, and even suggested theories about what might have happened. At first, his concern was appreciated, but soon his involvement felt strange. He was everywhere, talking to officers, asking neighbors if they had cameras, suggesting routes Emma may have taken. He even walked with Daniel at one point, pointing out that people don't just disappear without a reason. He offered comfort to Daniel, but his words carried a tone that was hard to read. Too calm, too rehearsed. Daniel, meanwhile, was breaking down. He barely slept, constantly checking the front door, hoping she might walk in. Days passed, and the search slowed. Police said they were doing all they could, but no new leads were coming in. Flyers went up around town, but there were no sightings, no calls, no evidence. As the days dragged on, Daniel started to feel the helpless weight of silence. As the days dragged on, Daniel started to feel the helpless weight of silence. The police seemed to be running out of momentum. The only person who seemed more involved than ever was Mr. Lawson. Always present, always watching, always asking. The same man who had seemed like the kindest neighbor now felt like a shadow that wouldn't leave. At first, the case seemed to be going nowhere. Officers followed every tip, but nothing led to Emma. Days turned into weeks. People began to lose hope. But then a small clue came from a nearby grocery store. The store's manager handed over security footage from the morning Emma disappeared. The cameras showed her jogging past the building around 6:45 a.m., just like Daniel had said. But what stood out wasn't Emma. It was the figure behind her. At a distance, someone seemed to be following her. The image was blurry, and the figure wore a hoodie. But the way they moved, slowly and deliberately, raised concern. Investigators checked every camera along the route. The figure appeared again at a street corner, just minutes after Emma passed. But after that, nothing. The trail ended. Then a new detail surfaced. A neighbor across the street came forward. Her young son had mentioned something strange that morning. He had been up early playing with his toys near the window. He told his mother he saw Mr. Lawson walking in the woods around the same time Emma usually jogged by. At first, she didn't think much of it, but once she learned what time Emma vanished, she realized it didn't make sense. Mr. Lawson had told police he was home the whole morning. Detectives followed up with Lawson again. He stuck to his story, saying he was reading the paper and feeding his dog. But the dog walker, who usually came at 7 a.m., said the dog wasn't home that day. Small cracks were starting to show. A few days later, a jogger in a nearby park found a phone tucked beneath a bench. The screen was shattered, and there was no case. Investigators confirmed it was Emma's. Oddly, the phone had been wiped clean. No messages, no call logs, not even saved contacts. Whoever had handled it knew what they were doing. Officers kept their findings quiet, hoping the pressure would cause someone to slip. The clues were stacking up. A blurry figure on camera, a neighbor's child's memory, a changed story, a wiped phone. All signs pointed in one direction. But there was still no physical evidence. No confession, no eyewitness, no body. Just suspicion and a growing sense that someone was hiding a very dark truth. The search began quietly, with officers entering the neighbor's house just after sunrise. From the outside, everything looked normal. The lawn was freshly mowed, the blinds perfectly straight, and a welcome mat sat at the front door. But inside, things told a much different story. The house felt cold and oddly silent. The living room was tidy, almost too tidy, like it had been cleaned with care to hide anything out of place. But as police moved deeper into the home, they found the first disturbing clue. In a small drawer beside the couch, they discovered a stack of envelopes, each marked with a woman's name. Emma's name was there too. Inside were clippings, photos taken from newspapers, and printed screenshots from her social media. A chill ran through the room. No one had known how closely she had been watched. In the basement, they found something even more unsettling. A wall covered in pages of writing, all done by hand. The words made little sense, almost like someone was rambling thoughts onto paper. Some pages were filled with repeated sentences written over and over, such as, "She walks past every morning, and no one sees me." Other pages mentioned dates and times, many of which matched Emma's usual jogging routine. It was clear someone had been keeping track of her for a long time. Near the back corner of the basement, hidden behind an old shelf, they uncovered a locked trunk. Inside were personal belongings that didn't belong to the homeowner. There was a small necklace that matched the one Emma's sister had described her wearing, a folded sweatshirt, stained and torn, and at the bottom of the trunk, a notebook labeled "Things I Regret." Each page listed vague events, like "the girl in the woods" or "what happened in 2003." Police would later link those phrases to two missing persons cases from nearby towns, cases that had gone unsolved for years. Upstairs, behind a locked door in the bedroom, they found a small crawl space. Inside it were old newspaper articles and flyers about women who had vanished. There were even maps marked with red X's. The neighbor who had once seemed so polite and harmless now appeared to have been living a double life. A quiet man with secrets buried deep, not just in his home, but possibly in the ground as well. The confession came late in the evening, after hours of questioning and silence. At first, he denied everything, saying he didn't know Emma beyond the occasional wave on the sidewalk. He kept his answers short, steady, trying to appear calm and collected. But over time, the cracks in his story began to show. His hands shook, and his eyes stopped meeting the officers. When the detective laid out the photos, the timeline, and the letters found in his house, he finally spoke, almost in a whisper. "I didn't mean to hurt anyone. I just wanted to feel something." He began to talk, slowly at first, about how it all started. He said he had always felt like people ignored him. He was invisible in his own life. No friends, no visitors, no one asking how he was doing. Watching Emma became his routine. At first it was harmless, he told himself. Just watching her walk by every morning, seeing what she wore, what time she left, and how often she smiled at strangers. But soon it turned into something darker. He admitted to writing everything down. Every move she made, every time she changed her route, every person she stopped to talk to. He confessed that gaining people's trust was easy. "You just have to be friendly," he said. He helped neighbors fix fences, carried groceries for the elderly, and always greeted people with a soft smile. He said people want to believe the best in others. That's what he counted on. Emma had once even told him she appreciated having such a kind neighbor. That moment stuck with him, not because of the compliment, but because he felt powerful. He was the kind neighbor on the outside, but inside he was full of rage and loneliness. He admitted he had been planning for months. He had chosen the day when no one else would be home. He had watched her leave her house, then waited until she passed his driveway. He described it like it was a dream he couldn't stop. It was quiet, too quiet, like the world paused just long enough for me to step outside myself. What shocked everyone most was how normal he had seemed. He had been invited to barbecues, helped set up neighborhood events, and even sat with families he later admitted to watching. His final words were quiet but clear. "I didn't want to be invisible anymore." The trial was one of the most emotional events the town had ever seen. The courtroom was filled with neighbors, friends, and family members who once shared smiles, conversations, and holidays with the man now sitting behind glass. Every day of testimony brought fresh disbelief. People cried quietly as the prosecutors revealed journal entries, hidden recordings, and the confession. It was painful to hear how someone who had been in their homes, eaten at their tables, and waved at their children could commit something so cruel. Emma's parents sat in the front row, holding hands. They listened as the court read aloud the final moments of their daughter's life. Her mother wiped her tears with a trembling hand. Her father stared forward, refusing to look at the man who had taken everything from them. During sentencing, the judge called the crime cold and calculated. He said that hiding behind a smile made it even more disturbing. The sentence was life without parole. For some, it brought a small sense of justice. Emma's family finally had answers, though it didn't bring her back. They could visit her grave knowing the truth, not just wondering what had happened. But for the town, the impact ran deeper. Trust was broken. People no longer waved as freely. They checked their locks twice. Neighbors who once borrowed sugar now avoided eye contact. The idea that someone so ordinary could hide such darkness left everyone unsettled. Teachers talked about it in classrooms. Parents talked about it with their children. Strangers were viewed with more caution. The community tried to move forward, but it never fully healed. The street where Emma once lived became quieter. Her house was eventually sold, but no one stayed long. The yard where she once played now sits still, the swing set untouched. This story became more than just a crime. It was a lesson, a reminder that evil doesn't always look like a threat. Sometimes it smiles. Sometimes it helps carry groceries. Sometimes it lives right next door. Always trust your instincts. If something feels off, it probably is. Be kind, but be careful. And remember, sometimes the places that feel the safest can hide the darkest truths. Story number 5. It started with a 911 call that chilled everyone who heard it. There were no words from the victim, only heavy breathing and a quiet male voice repeating the same phrase over and over. The line stayed open for 46 seconds. That was all. Then silence. When the recording was later reviewed, people described the voice as calm, almost gentle. Yet something about it felt wrong, like it didn't belong in a moment of fear. That call would become the center of a mystery that shook an entire town. Lila Hart was a 24-year-old woman with a bright smile and big dreams. She worked at a small bookstore during the day and was saving money to start her own art studio. Friends described her as kind, trustworthy, and full of energy. She wasn't the type to get into trouble. She lived in a quiet neighborhood with her younger sister, just a short walk from where she had grown up. Lila's life was simple, filled with routines and people who cared about her. On the night she disappeared, everything seemed normal. She had spent the evening with her best friend, catching up over tea. Around 9:45 p.m., she left to walk home, a distance of only 10 minutes. It was a path she had taken dozens of times before. Nothing seemed out of place. Her friend even offered to walk her part of the way, but Lila smiled and said she'd be fine. That was the last time anyone saw her. When the police began to investigate, they found her phone near a lamppost, still on and still recording. There were no signs of a struggle. No one had heard screams. Nothing was stolen. Her house showed no sign of forced entry. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. But that phone call, the sound of breathing, the soft voice, the final moment, was all anyone had to go on. The man's voice repeated the same line quietly. "Don't move. Just listen." That's what made the case so terrifying. The voice didn't yell or threaten. It sounded like someone she might have known. Someone who didn't need to break in. Because maybe, just maybe, she let him come close. Lila Hart had a calm and steady life, the kind that made her loved by everyone who knew her. She was 24 years old, smart, kind, and full of quiet determination. Every morning she would walk down the same path to the bookstore where she worked. She had always loved reading, and the bookstore felt like home to her. She greeted each customer with a warm smile and had a special way of recommending the perfect book. Locals often said the place felt warmer when Lila was around. She shared a small but cozy house with her younger sister Emily. The two were incredibly close. Since losing their parents years earlier, they had leaned on each other for everything. Lila was like a second mother to Emily, supportive, protective, and full of advice. Their neighborhood was peaceful, filled with trees, friendly neighbors, and the kind of quiet that made people feel safe. Families walked their dogs at dusk, kids rode bikes without fear, and doors were often left unlocked. It was not the kind of place where someone vanished without a trace. Lila's days followed a gentle rhythm. She worked during the day, helped Emily with school in the evening, and often spent time drawing or painting at night. Art was her dream, and she had started saving money to open a small studio. Her friends admired her focus and loved her honesty. She was always ready to help, whether it was giving someone a ride, picking up groceries for a neighbor, or simply listening when someone needed to talk. She wasn't the type to make enemies. Everyone who knew her described her as thoughtful and soft-spoken. She didn't go out late, didn't take risks, and didn't keep secrets. There were no signs of problems in her life. No arguments, no strange behavior, no reason for anyone to harm her. That's why her disappearance shocked everyone. One moment, she was walking home as usual. The next, she was gone, and no one could explain how or why. Even the police struggled to find a direction. There were no warning signs. Lila didn't live recklessly. She didn't have dangerous friends. She was the kind of person who made people feel safe. That's what made her vanishing so hard to understand. It didn't just break hearts, it broke trust in a place where nothing bad was supposed to happen. On the night of October 14th, everything seemed normal, until it wasn't. Lila Hart had spent the evening at her best friend Megan's apartment, just a few blocks away from her own home. They'd had tea, talked about an upcoming art fair, and shared a few laughs. At exactly 9:45 p.m., Lila said goodbye and stepped out into the quiet, cool night. Her walk home should have taken no more than 10 minutes. She had made that walk hundreds of times before, always safe, always uneventful. As she walked along Maple Street, cameras from a nearby gas station caught her on video at 9:53 p.m. The footage showed her walking calmly, head down, hands in the pockets of her coat. The streetlights glowed behind her, and a light drizzle had just started. Nothing looked out of place. No one seemed to be following her, and she wasn't running or acting afraid. Then came the moment no one can forget. At 10:02 p.m., Lila made a call to 911. The operator answered quickly, but no one spoke on the other end. All they could hear was the sound of wind, some light rustling, and a man's voice whispering something faint and unclear. The whisper wasn't angry, but it wasn't calm either. It was quiet, close, and controlled, just inches from Lila's phone. The call lasted exactly 46 seconds, then silence. Not even a scream. The line cut off, and Lila was never heard from again. Authorities traced the call and began searching the area immediately. By midnight, police officers, neighbors, and search dogs were combing the streets and alleys around Lila's neighborhood. At 1:12 a.m., they found her phone lying face down in the grass just 1 block from her house. The screen was cracked. There were no fingerprints, no blood, and no other clues. Forensic teams examined the phone, the surrounding area, and reviewed more security footage, but found nothing suspicious after the gas station video. There were no signs of a struggle. No one reported hearing anything unusual. It was as if she had vanished into the night, without leaving a single trace. The last thing anyone knew for sure was the sound of that man's whisper echoing through the 911 line, haunting everyone who heard it. The investigation into Lila's disappearance began immediately after the chilling 911 call. Police officers, along with trained dogs and local volunteers, searched through parks, alleys, abandoned buildings, and even the wooded area near her neighborhood. Despite the wide effort, they didn't find a single piece of evidence that showed a struggle had taken place. The ground was undisturbed, and there were no torn clothes, blood, or signs of someone being dragged. It was as if Lila had simply vanished. Detectives moved quickly to question Lila's family, friends, and neighbors. Everyone was shocked. No one could think of a reason why anyone would want to hurt her. She had no enemies, no ongoing conflicts, and no relationship troubles. She lived a quiet life, focusing on her art and helping out at the local community center. Her parents described her as kind and responsible, the kind of person who called home every night to say she was safe. The voice captured in the 911 call became the center of the investigation. Police enhanced the audio, trying to identify what the man was whispering. Though the words were too faint to fully understand, the tone was unmistakably calm and cold. They compared the voice against recordings from people close to Lila, but no match was found. Her friends couldn't recognize it either. The whisper belonged to a stranger, or someone hiding a very dark side. Days later, a woman from a nearby street came forward with what she had seen the night Lila vanished. She told police she had noticed a dark-colored car slowly driving down Maple Street around 10 p.m. The vehicle didn't have its headlights on, and she couldn't see the license plate. She thought it was odd at the time, but didn't think much of it, until the news of Lila's disappearance broke. The police considered this an important lead, but they had little else to work with. No other cameras had caught the car, and it had not been seen since. As the days turned into weeks, detectives began to believe Lila might have known her attacker. The lack of struggle, the calm nature of the 911 call, and how quickly everything happened pointed to someone she may have trusted, someone who got close without her raising an alarm. This theory made the case even more disturbing. Months had slipped by with no leads, and Lila's disappearance remained a mystery that haunted the town. People whispered theories, but none brought any real answers. The case seemed cold, until a woman walked into the police station with a look of fear and certainty on her face. She asked to speak privately with the investigators handling Lila's case. Sitting across from them, she said just one sentence that changed everything. "I know that voice." She told them that the soft, eerie voice heard in the 911 call belonged to her ex-husband, Marcus Hale. The woman had divorced him years earlier, after enduring years of emotional abuse, manipulation, and subtle threats. She had never gone to the police, fearing retaliation, but the sound of that whisper on the news sent a chill down her spine she couldn't ignore. It was him. She was sure of it. Investigators pulled Marcus Hale's records. He had no criminal convictions, but his past included several restraining orders filed by women he had dated. Neighbors described him as quiet, reclusive, and strange. He lived alone just 2 blocks away from where Lila had been last seen. At first glance, there was no connection between the two, no shared workplace, no mutual friends, and no family ties. Then police uncovered something small but significant. 6 months before Lila disappeared, she had helped Marcus when his car broke down on the side of a road near the community center. She had offered him a phone to call a tow truck and waited with him for a few minutes. According to a co-worker, Lila mentioned the encounter once, saying he was awkward but polite. For most people, a moment like that would be forgettable, but for Marcus, it was the start of an obsession. Investigators got a warrant and searched Marcus's home. At first, the house looked clean and orderly, but behind a locked door in the basement, they found something deeply disturbing. The room was dark and empty, except for a wall covered in photographs, dozens of pictures of Lila, taken without her knowledge. Some showed her walking home. Others were of her inside the community center, taken through windows. Next to the photos was a notebook. Inside were pages filled with Marcus's thoughts, obsessive writings about fate, belonging, and Lila. He believed they were meant to be together. The more they read, the clearer it became. Marcus hadn't just watched her, he had planned every step. The arrest came swiftly after the evidence was found. Marcus Hale didn't resist when the officers arrived. He stood at his front door, calm and quiet, as if he had been expecting it all along. During questioning, he admitted to what he had done. His confession wasn't filled with rage or guilt. It was cold, emotionless, and disturbing in its simplicity. He said, "I just wanted her to listen." But what he had done to Lila was far beyond someone trying to be heard. His obsession had turned into a plan, and that plan had ended in something irreversible. He admitted to watching her every day, learning her routines, and choosing the moment he believed was right. He believed Lila ignored the signs he had given, the looks, the notes he never sent, and the imagined connection he believed was real. When she didn't return his feelings she never even knew existed, he decided to force her to notice him. He took her on the night of the call. The rest of what happened was harder to hear. The final location of her body was revealed by Marcus himself. It was buried in a shallow grave in a quiet wooded area nearly 30 miles away from town. He had visited the place before. It was a spot he had chosen in advance, a part of his sick preparation. Lila's body was recovered days later, and her family finally got the one thing they had been holding on to: closure. But peace was harder to come by. The entire town had been shaken by what happened. People no longer looked at their neighbors the same way. Streets felt different, nights felt longer, and kindness from strangers now came with hesitation. Lila's sister spoke during a small vigil. She said something that stayed with everyone who heard it. He made her listen, but now the world will listen to her story. Her words weren't about revenge. They were about making sure Lila's voice, though taken too soon, would never be forgotten. Sometimes danger hides behind ordinary smiles, in quiet neighborhoods, on warm summer nights. It doesn't always look like a threat until it's too late. Be aware, be cautious, and remember, even when everything feels safe, it's okay to trust your instinct and protect your space. Story number 6. They thought it was just a break-in, but then they found the journal. Emily Carter lived in a quiet, peaceful neighborhood where nothing unusual ever seemed to happen. Her life looked ordinary to those around her. She worked as a nurse, kept to herself, and was always polite to neighbors. That's why when she was found dead in her home one Monday morning, it left the entire street in shock. Police were called to Emily's house after her co-worker reported that she didn't show up for her shift and wasn't answering her phone. When officers arrived, they found the front door locked, but something didn't feel right. They entered through the back, and what they discovered was confusing. Emily was lying on her bed, lifeless, but there were no signs of a struggle, no blood, and no weapons nearby. The house looked untouched, nothing broken, nothing missing. It didn't feel like a robbery. Everything was quiet, too quiet. As they walked through her bedroom, one officer began checking under the bed and inside drawers for any clue. That's when he noticed a small leather-bound book sticking out from under the mattress. It was worn on the edges, as if someone had used it often. When the officer opened it, he realized it wasn't just a diary. It was a detailed record of fear, suspicion, and a story Emily had never told anyone aloud. Each page was filled with dated entries, written in her neat handwriting. The early pages talked about daily life, work stress, and her breakup a few months back. But as the pages continued, the tone shifted. Emily began writing about strange noises at night, the feeling of being watched, and how certain things in her house weren't where she left them. The more the officers read, the more it became clear. This journal wasn't just a diary. It was a record of someone crying out for help. Emily had feared someone was following her, and she had written down everything she noticed. Every time she felt unsafe, every person she found suspicious, and all of it led up to one chilling sentence in the final pages. If something happens to me, start here. This journal would soon become the key to solving the mystery of Emily Carter's death. Emily Carter was 32 years old. She lived alone in a modest, two-bedroom house on a quiet street where everyone knew each other by name. To the outside world, she seemed like someone who had her life together. She worked long shifts at the local hospital, where her co-workers admired her for her calm, patient nature. Emily didn't go out much, but she always smiled and waved to her neighbors. She didn't create drama or gossip. People respected her space. But those who looked closer noticed something had changed. A few months before her death, Emily had ended a serious relationship. The man she was with had been a regular presence in her life for years. They had been planning to move in together, but something happened. Something Emily didn't talk about. After the breakup, she became quieter than usual. She no longer chatted with her neighbor on morning walks. She stopped attending weekend barbecues and community events. Her cheerful tone faded. In her journal, she began writing more frequently after the breakup. The early entries were about healing, about moving forward, about trying to feel strong again. But soon her words started to shift. She wrote that she didn't feel alone in her house, even when she knew she was. That she would hear footsteps on the porch at night, soft and careful, like someone didn't want to be heard. She mentioned the porch light flickering even after replacing the bulb. A few times she saw shadows move across her window, too tall to be trees, too fast to be her imagination. Emily began double-checking the locks on her doors, even though she had always felt safe in her home. She bought security cameras but didn't tell anyone. She wrote that she felt embarrassed, unsure if she was just being paranoid. But something inside her told her that she wasn't imagining things. She wrote, "I know what I feel. Someone's watching me." These thoughts were never shared with friends or co-workers. Emily kept them inside the pages of her journal as if she believed the words might protect her. She didn't want to be seen as dramatic or unstable, but with every entry her fear became more real. The woman everyone thought was calm and put together was silently falling apart, and no one noticed until it was too late. Emily's journal had always been a safe place. At first, her entries were filled with reflections, memories, and ordinary routines. But over time, her tone changed. The handwriting became sharper, faster, and the content darker. Her words showed growing fear. What started as small concerns turned into a pattern of specific, frightening details. She began keeping track of the strange things happening. Each new page listed dates and times. She described how certain items in her house would be moved slightly, not enough to draw attention unless you were looking. A mug she always kept on the kitchen shelf would be in the sink. A window she remembered closing was left cracked open. These incidents made her feel like someone was watching her, someone who knew her habits. Then came the name. She wrote about a man she saw near her workplace. At first, she thought he was a patient's family member, but he started showing up too often, in places he didn't belong. Once at the parking garage, once outside the hospital cafeteria, and another time just across the street from her building. He never approached her, but he didn't look away either. His face became something she couldn't forget. Sharp jawline, thin lips, short dark hair, and eyes that followed her movements too closely. Emily started leaving notes in her own home to see if they would be disturbed. She would tape a hair over the edge of a door or place a book at a perfect angle. Every time something was off, she wrote it down. She wasn't just scared anymore. She was certain. One journal entry stood out more than any other. In shaky handwriting, she wrote, "He knows I know. I think he's coming soon." Her words held no more doubt. She believed the man she kept seeing was watching her, following her, and now targeting her. She wrote that she had started locking her bedroom door at night and sleeping with a light on. She even considered staying with a friend, but she didn't want to seem dramatic. Her fear kept building, and yet she stayed quiet, letting her journal speak for her. Later, when the journal was turned over to the police, the man she described matched someone already known to them, a former patient's relative with a history of mental illness and stalking. Emily had seen the danger coming. She had written everything down, but nobody had read it in time. Daniel Marks was not a stranger to Emily. His name didn't appear early in her journal, but when it did, it was with quiet alarm. She wrote it without context at first, just a first name and last initial, Daniel M. A few pages later, she explained more. He was a friend of her ex-boyfriend, someone who had once seemed quiet and polite, the type of person who never drew attention. But something about him had always made her uneasy. He had a way of watching without speaking, listening too carefully, and remembering small things Emily didn't recall. Telling him. After her breakup, she didn't expect to see him again. But she did. Once at a grocery store across town, another time near her gym, just sitting in his car, and again, standing outside the building across from her workplace. Every time she saw him, she felt that same tightness in her chest. Daniel had no official criminal record. On paper, he was clean. But when investigators looked deeper, they found something troubling. Years ago, he had been detained for stalking a former classmate. The charges were dropped due to insufficient evidence. There were no witnesses, and the woman he followed had eventually moved away. The case was forgotten. Until now. Emily had written that she once went to the police. She tried to report a man who kept showing up in places she didn't expect. But without physical threats or direct contact, she said they told her there wasn't much they could do. Her entry ended with the words, "They told me to lock my doors and stay aware." As if I haven't already. The journal became a voice she used when no one else would listen. It explained how she felt dismissed, alone, and unsure of how to make someone believe her. She didn't share her fear with friends or family. Maybe she thought she could handle it herself. Or maybe she believed she was overreacting, even when the signs were clear. Surveillance footage later confirmed everything she had written. Security cameras from a neighbor's doorbell caught Daniel's face several times over 2 months. He never approached, just circled the block, parked nearby, or stood behind trees across the street. He was always just close enough to see her house, just far enough to not be noticed, until it was too late. Daniel sat in the small interrogation room, silent at first, refusing to speak. The officers laid out what they had, photos, videos, and most importantly, Emily's journal. Page after page written in her own hand. Her words described every moment she saw him, every time she felt followed, and every detail she remembered. It was impossible to deny. The truth was right there in ink. When the officers read back parts of the journal, Daniel's face began to change. He shifted in his chair, avoided eye contact, and clenched his fists. At one point, when asked why he had followed Emily so many times, he said softly, "She was supposed to be mine." That was the moment the shift happened. Bit by bit, the truth began to spill out. Daniel admitted that he had watched Emily for months. After her breakup with his friend, He felt like she had not only rejected her ex, but had rejected him too. He convinced himself that she was supposed to be with him, that they were somehow connected. He believed they had a silent understanding. But in reality, Emily never returned those feelings. She was never even close to Daniel. The more she avoided him, the more obsessed he became. He started tracking her routine. He knew when she left for work, when she came home, and what time her lights turned off. He memorized every detail of her life without ever speaking to her. He knew where the spare key was hidden, under the third flower pot near her porch. On the night of the murder, Daniel waited. He had seen her return home alone. The lights in her house were on, and everything seemed quiet. Around midnight, he used the spare key to enter. Emily was asleep. He walked through the house slowly, stopping in her room. She woke up and saw him. She screamed. Daniel panicked. He didn't expect her to wake up. In his confession, he said, "I didn't mean to do it at first, but when she looked at me like I was a stranger, I just snapped. I couldn't take it. If I couldn't have her, no one could." The journal proved everything. It documented each moment, each fear, each close encounter. Without it, the case may have gone cold. But her own words brought the truth to light and gave her the voice that had been ignored for far too long. Emily's last journal entry was short, but haunting. Just one sentence written in shaky handwriting. "If something happens to me, please read this." That one line carried the weight of all her fear, all her instincts, and all her attempts to protect herself. She knew something wasn't right. She felt it every time she looked over her shoulder or heard footsteps too close behind. And when no one listened, she wrote it all down. Her words, carefully kept, ended up becoming the most powerful piece of evidence. Her journal was more than just a record of events. It was her voice. It was everything she wasn't able to say out loud. Every entry was a piece of a puzzle that no one knew existed. And in the end, it brought justice. It told the story no one else could. The town was shaken. People who had passed Daniel in grocery stores, waved to him in parks, or seen him at school events were left in disbelief. No one had expected this from someone so quiet, someone who never raised suspicion. The truth forced everyone to rethink what they believed about safety and about the people around them. Emily's family held a memorial. They gathered in the park where she used to run. Her favorite songs played softly in the background. Friends shared stories of her kindness, her laughter, her dreams of becoming a teacher. They didn't focus on how she died, but how she lived. Her courage in the face of fear, her effort to protect herself even when no one else believed her. Those were the things they wanted people to remember. Later, her story was shared online and in schools, not to spread fear, but to teach awareness, to help others recognize warning signs, to remind people that trusting your instincts is not weakness, it's survival. Emily's journal became a symbol of strength, not silence. If someone ever makes you feel unsafe, say something. Write it down. Save everything. It might feel small or unnecessary in the moment, but one day it could be the only voice left when yours is gone. What Emily wrote saved the truth, and that truth made sure her story wouldn't be buried with her. Story number 7. A dusty storage unit sat untouched for years until it was cleared out during routine inventory work. Inside, hidden beneath old files and forgotten items, was a plain cardboard box. It didn't look like much, just old and worn. But inside were dozens of cassette tapes. Each tape had strange codes, numbers, and dates written in fading ink. There were no labels that made sense, no names, no police case numbers, and no explanation of what they were or why they existed. The box ended up in the hands of a retired detective who had spent decades working on cold cases. Curious, he brought it home. At first, he thought it might just be audio recordings of old interviews or useless background noise, but something about the careful labeling made him pause. He dusted off an old cassette player and inserted one of the tapes. The moment he pressed play, he heard a man's voice. Calm, clear, almost gentle. But the words that came out chilled him. The voice was not giving a report or telling a story. It was confessing. The man spoke in detail about following someone home, about watching from a distance, about choosing the right time. Then in a voice as steady as if he were reading a shopping list, he described exactly how he killed them. The tape didn't sound like a prank. It didn't sound like someone making up a story. It sounded real. The detective played another tape, then another. Each one was similar, a different victim, a different location, but the same voice. No emotion, no regret, only descriptions. None of these murders had ever been solved. Some had never even been connected to each other. But now these old tapes were revealing patterns, names, and locations that matched real missing persons reports and unsolved cases. It was like the killer had kept a personal audio diary, not to express guilt, but to keep a record. As more tapes were reviewed, the horror grew. It was clear this wasn't the work of someone who had acted once or twice. This was someone who had killed over and over and never been caught. The discovery of the tapes marked the beginning of a massive investigation and the reopening of cold cases that had been closed for decades. The tapes continued to reveal more than just crimes. They began to reveal the man behind them. Investigators listened carefully, focusing not only on what he said, but how he said it. His voice never changed. It stayed calm, controlled, and cold. Each sentence was spoken like it had been rehearsed 100 times. There was no hesitation, no regret. He never raised his voice. He never laughed. He never sounded angry or happy. It was the voice of someone who saw murder as just another part of his day. The man never said his real name, but small clues slipped through. He talked about working nights. He mentioned long drives, cheap motels, and fast food. Once he referred to his apartment above the shop. Another time, he said he didn't mind the cold weather. He mentioned cities that spanned different states. His words pointed to someone who traveled often, someone who never stayed in one place too long. The first victim he described lived in a small town, not far from a highway. He said he followed her for 3 days before making his move. He chose her because she seemed quiet and easy to forget. He didn't say her name, but he described her house, her job, her schedule, and even her car. Police matched this with an old missing person case. The details were too close to be a coincidence. That woman had disappeared in 1992. Her body was never found. The most chilling part was the way he talked about it. Not with excitement, not with guilt, just facts. He said he watched, waited, and acted. He didn't call it murder. He called it cleaning up a mistake. It sounded more like someone taking out the trash than ending a life. Voice analysis experts tried to narrow down his location based on background sounds. On one tape, a train horn could be heard. Nerum. Another, distant church bells. One recording had the sound of seagulls and crashing waves. Slowly, a pattern started to form. Each clue pointed to cities along the East Coast, all connected by major highways. The killer had left a trail. And now, with the tapes in hand, detectives had their first chance in years to follow it. The tapes gave police something they hadn't had in years. Names, details, and places that finally connected the dots. With each recording, they began comparing what the man described to cold cases from across several states. One by one, victims began to surface. Not physically, but through old reports, missing person flyers, and devastated families who had long given up hope of ever knowing the truth. Most of the victims were women, many in their early 30s or 40s. They lived alone, often worked late hours, and had little or no family nearby. Their disappearances had made barely a ripple in the media. A few were briefly covered by local news before being forgotten. Some had been misclassified, runaways, suicides, even accidental deaths. But now, through the killer's own words, their stories were being corrected. One woman had vanished in 1995 after leaving her night shift at a diner. Her case file had been closed years ago due to lack of evidence. But in the tapes, the man described a waitress with tired eyes, the exact location of the diner, and how he had followed her home. The match was impossible to ignore. Her name was Susan Keller, and her family had spent decades wondering what had happened to her. Now they finally had an answer. Another recording described a woman who loved gardening, who lived in a yellow house with white shutters. The man said he had waited in the alley behind her place until she came out to water her plants. The victim's name was Gloria Marine. She had disappeared on a warm afternoon in 1999, just a few blocks from where her favorite flower shop stood. Her case had gone cold within weeks. One of the most chilling moments came when the man spoke of a woman who had never been found. He described a dirt road, a crooked tree, and a clearing in the woods. He didn't give her name, only that she was quiet like the others. Investigators took that tape seriously and organized a search team to the location he mentioned. Days later, human remains were uncovered. Bones buried beneath years of soil and leaves, almost exactly where he said they would be. With each identification, families were notified. Tears were shed. Burials were finally held. For some, it brought a strange peace. For others, it opened wounds that had never healed. But one thing was certain. The killer's voice had finally given the victims their stories back. He talked about fitting in like it was a skill he had perfected. In the tapes, the man mentioned how important it was to act like everyone else, to smile, to be polite, to not seem out of place. That's what kept him invisible. He said blending in was more effective than hiding. It made people trust him. They opened their doors without thinking twice. He described working jobs that gave him easy access to private spaces. He mentioned checking basements, walking through living rooms, and seeing people in their most relaxed states. From the way he talked, it became clear he had worked as some sort of home service worker, maybe a repairman, a utility inspector, or even a building maintenance person. His job allowed him to enter homes without suspicion, and he paid attention to everything. Who lived alone, who had a dog, who kept their windows unlocked. When police listened to this part of the recordings, they started looking at employment records from the areas where the victims had lived. They focused on companies that provided in-home services during the same time period the crimes took place. It was a long list, covering years in different cities. Many workers had come and gone, and most had clean records. But one man stood out, not because of a criminal history, but because of where he had been. His name wasn't familiar. He had never been arrested, and nothing in his background raised any red flags. But when detectives looked at his employment timeline and compared it with the dates and locations of the disappearances, the pattern was impossible to ignore. He had lived or worked near nearly every crime scene, often just weeks or days before each woman went missing, and every time he had moved to a new place shortly after. They found out he had passed away a few years earlier in a quiet town, far from where it all started. No one had suspected him. He had lived alone, kept to himself, and never talked much about his past. The tapes found hidden in a lockbox in his attic were his only confession. It was a trail of his crimes told in his own voice, never meant to be heard by anyone. Yet somehow those recordings survived him and finally brought the truth to light. Experts who listened to the tapes believed the killer didn't record them because he felt guilty. Instead, they thought he did it because he was proud. The way he spoke about each murder made it sound like he was teaching something. He explained his actions like they were part of a method, calling them lessons. He described how he planned each crime, how he chose his victims, and even how he avoided getting caught. It was all very calm and controlled, as if he was giving instructions for something simple. The tapes were not left out in the open. They were hidden in a metal box, tucked deep in the attic under old blankets and forgotten boxes. But they were not just thrown in. Each tape was carefully labeled with numbers and short titles, like Lesson 1 or The House on Maple Street. This level of organization made it seem like he wanted someone to find them, maybe not right away, but someday. It was as if he knew the truth would eventually come out, and he didn't mind. In fact, maybe he even wanted it. Some of the recordings ended without warning, stopping in the middle of a sentence. This added to the mystery. People wondered if he had been interrupted while recording, or if he had planned to return to finish them. There were gaps in the story, and some details were left out completely. It made listeners feel like there was more, something missing that had yet to be discovered. In one of the last recordings, the killer spoke differently. His voice was slower, and he mentioned feeling tired. He said the urge he used to feel was no longer there. He talked about getting older and feeling distant from who he used to be. There was no apology, no sign of regret, just a sense that he was done. He didn't explain why he stopped, only that it had ended. The final tape left behind a chilling clue. He mentioned that he had written more about his thoughts in journals, pages and pages of details that were never found. He said they were kept safe, but didn't say where. The idea that more of his words could still be hidden somewhere keeps this case open in the minds of those who heard his voice. Although the killer passed away before he could be brought to trial, the tapes he left behind became the final piece that connected years of unanswered questions. For many families, the details he described brought a form of painful peace. Some had been waiting decades, unsure of what happened to their loved ones. Hearing their names on those tapes confirmed their worst fears, but it also ended the silence that had haunted them for years. Even now, investigators are going through every piece of evidence to make sure no detail is missed. The way the killer spoke in the recordings made authorities wonder if he was working alone. Some believe he may have had help or shared his twisted ideas with others. The search continues, not just to solve other cold cases, but to make sure no one else was involved or inspired by his actions. The fear that someone out there could be following in his footsteps pushes the investigation forward. This case taught people an uncomfortable truth. The killer didn't live in shadows or wear a mask. He lived in a quiet neighborhood, kept a tidy yard, and said hello to his neighbors. There was nothing on the surface that warned anyone of the darkness inside him. It's a reminder that danger doesn't always look dangerous. Sometimes it smiles. Sometimes it shakes your hand. That's what makes it so frightening. The tapes have since been moved into a special archive where crime experts and psychologists study them. Each recording is listened to, transcribed, and used to help understand how people like him think and act. These recordings may one day help catch others before they can hurt anyone. Even in death, the killer's voice is being used, not to spread fear, but to protect others by shining a light on the minds of those who hide behind masks. Let this story be a quiet warning. If you ever notice something that feels off, even something small, speak up. Strange behavior, sudden changes, or dark comments should never be ignored. You don't have to know all the answers to raise a concern. Sometimes saying something early can stop a tragedy. Because evil doesn't always come with a warning. Sometimes it whispers behind the walls next door. Story number 8. It was the kind of evening people enjoy from the safety of their homes. Light rain falling steadily, the roads shimmering under the soft glow of streetlights. In the heart of the city, most people had already returned home, their windows glowing warm behind curtains. But for Rafiq, the night was just beginning. He was a familiar face to many, known as a quiet, dependable man who had been driving a taxi for over a decade. His route was usually routine, and he took pride in his work. Rain never stopped him, it just made him more alert. Rafiq left his home at 6:30 p.m. after dinner with his wife and young daughter. Like always, he promised to be careful and said he would be home by midnight. He started the night shift as usual, picked up a couple from the train station, dropped off a student at the hostel, and even stopped for a quick cup of tea at his favorite roadside stall. Everything was completely normal. Then came the booking that changed everything. At 9:40 p.m., a request came through the taxi app. The pickup location was in the outer part of the city, a quiet area not far from the old railway yard. Without hesitation, Rafiq accepted. It wasn't a strange location, just less busy than the city center. He clicked on the way in the app and began driving toward the destination. That was the last known digital activity from his phone. By 10 p.m., Rafiq's phone stopped sharing location updates. The app showed the trip was still in progress, but there was no signal. His family tried calling him, but the calls went straight to voicemail. Thinking it could be a network issue, they waited. But as the night went on and there was still no word from him, worry turned into fear. The next morning, Rafiq's wife went to the local police station and filed a missing person report. She explained that her husband had never missed a check-in, never disappeared without reason. He wasn't the kind of man to vanish without a word. Friends and fellow drivers also expressed shock. Rafiq had no enemies, no debts, no known troubles. Yet somehow, in the middle of an ordinary, rainy night, he disappeared without a trace. Investigators started by checking the ride history from the taxi app. It confirmed what the family already knew. Rafiq had accepted a booking around 9:40 p.m. the night he vanished. The ride was scheduled to pick up a passenger near the edge of the city, close to the old railway yard. It wasn't a common pickup spot, but not entirely unusual either. The area was quiet, with few homes and mostly industrial buildings. The passenger's details raised immediate suspicion. The name used in the app was fake, just a string of random letters. There was no profile picture, no verified ID, and no linked payment method. This meant someone had created the account without leaving any real trace behind. The app company could provide the registration time, but even that led to a dead end. The account had been created just 2 hours before the ride and was never used again. To find more clues, police reviewed CCTV footage from a small grocery shop located about 100 meters from the pickup point. The camera wasn't high quality, but it caught a few key moments. At around 9:50 p.m., Rafiq's taxi could be seen pulling up and stopping by the curb. The headlights stayed on. He waited patiently, just like he always did. A few minutes later, a figure appeared at the edge of the frame. The person walked slowly, wearing a long coat with the hood pulled up, hiding most of their face. They approached the taxi from the passenger side. Rafiq didn't appear to get out of the car. The person opened the door and got in. Moments later, the taxi drove away, turning out of view. That was the last known sighting of the vehicle. The car's GPS stopped updating shortly after it left the pickup point. There were no more signals, no final destination logged in the app. It was as if the car had simply vanished. Police believed something had gone wrong not long after the ride began. Either the person who got into the taxi had planned something, or Rafiq had driven into an unexpected situation. There was no sign of struggle at the pickup location, and the figure in the CCTV footage had taken care not to reveal their face. Every detail pointed toward a planned disappearance, or worse. As soon as police confirmed that Rafiq and his taxi were missing, a citywide search began. Officers divided the surrounding area into zones and started checking the back roads, highway exits, and abandoned buildings. Forest trails and riversides were searched carefully, especially near the location where Rafiq had picked up his last passenger. Drones flew over open fields while tracking dogs followed any possible scent from the last known location. The community quickly joined the effort. Neighbors, friends, and strangers volunteered their time. Flyers with Rafiq's picture were printed and handed out across the city. His face appeared on every local news broadcast, and people began sharing posts about him across social media platforms. Within hours, the post had gone viral, spreading beyond the city limits. His calm face, kind eyes, and the words "missing since last night" caught attention everywhere. Soon, the police began receiving calls from people who believed they might have seen the missing taxi. Most tips led nowhere, but one stood out. A man called from a gas station located on the edge of a small town, about 40 kilometers from where Rafiq had disappeared. He said he remembered a taxi stopping at the pump around midnight the night Rafiq went missing. It was strange because that station usually didn't get taxis that late. Police rushed to the gas station and collected the security footage. The camera placed above. The entrance had a clear view of the pumps. The footage showed a white taxi pulling in just after 12:15 a.m. Unfortunately, the car's license plate wasn't visible due to the angle and the poor lighting. But inside the station, another camera caught someone entering to pay. The person wore a dark hoodie and kept their head down. The build and size looked similar to Rafiq's, but the video wasn't clear enough to confirm his identity. Despite the lack of certainty, this small detail gave everyone hope. If Rafiq had been seen after the last GPS signal, maybe he was still alive. Maybe he had escaped something, or was being held somewhere. The gas station lead became the first real clue, and from that moment, the search expanded. Every road leading away from that town was explored, and people were urged to report any strange activity or abandoned vehicles. Hope stayed alive as long as there was even a trace to follow. 3 days after Rafiq's disappearance, a local fisherman noticed something unusual near the riverbank, just outside the city. Hidden behind tall grass and bushes, he spotted a white taxi with mud splattered all over its lower half. The car looked like it had been driven off-road and left in a hurry. He called the police immediately, and within minutes, officers arrived and sealed off the area. The taxi was identified as Rafiq's. Its doors were unlocked, but the inside told a disturbing story. The seats were damp and covered in dirt, with muddy footprints on the floor. The driver's seat had been pushed all the way back, not in its usual position. It looked like someone else had been driving after Rafiq. Even worse, the dashboard and door handles had been carefully wiped clean, leaving no fingerprints behind. As police searched the vehicle, they found Rafiq's mobile phone smashed and shoved under the passenger seat. The screen was broken, and it looked like someone had stepped on it deliberately. His wallet and ID were nowhere to be found. There was no cash in the car either, although Rafiq usually kept a small amount with him for change. The most worrying discovery was at the back seat. Small bloodstains were spotted on the seatbelt and floor mat. A sample was quickly sent for testing. A few hours later, results confirmed that the blood belonged to Rafiq. This single detail changed the entire direction of the case. It was no longer just a missing person search. It had now become a serious criminal investigation. Next to the doorframe, detectives found a torn piece of fabric caught in the edge of the seatbelt buckle. It didn't match any of Rafiq's clothing. The cloth was dark in color and looked like part of a hoodie or jacket. Investigators believed it might belong to whoever had been in the car with him that night. This was the first physical evidence that someone else had been with Rafiq inside that car. With the damage to the phone, the wiped surfaces, and now the blood, it was clear that this wasn't a simple robbery. Someone had gone to great lengths to erase what happened, but they hadn't done it perfectly. The riverbank had kept it secret for 3 days, but now that silence was broken. As police dug deeper into Rafiq's disappearance, they turned their attention to the people he interacted with the most: his regular passengers, fellow drivers at the taxi stand, and a few close friends. They went through his recent call logs and trip bookings, hoping to find a name or location that might give them something new. That's when a name came up again and again: an unknown male who had recently been seen catching late-night rides from different drivers in the same area where Rafiq was last reported. Witnesses described this man as quiet, average height, and always wearing a dark jacket with a ripped sleeve. That detail immediately stood out. Police remembered the torn cloth they had recovered from Rafiq's car, caught in the seatbelt. When they compared it with the description, it seemed like more than just a coincidence. Further investigation revealed that the man had been living in a rented room just 5 blocks from where Rafiq's taxi was found. The landlady remembered him well. She said he paid rent in cash, didn't talk much, and often stayed out late. But most importantly, she recalled that on the same night Rafiq vanished, the man had left in a hurry. He didn't say a word, didn't ask for his deposit, and hadn't come back since. He just disappeared. When police searched the small room he left behind, they found a plastic bag in the corner. Inside were a few clothes, some half-used toiletries, and a set of car keys that didn't match any of the cars he was known to own. But there was one more item that truly caught their attention: a notebook filled with strange writings. Some pages listed times and locations, almost like a schedule. Others had only scribbled phrases repeated over and over, such as "don't leave tracks" and "stay quiet, move fast." Police began to believe this man might have posed as a passenger to get inside Rafiq's taxi. The timing fit, the jacket matched, and now the bag of evidence was pointing in his direction. But despite the growing suspicion, one major piece was still missing: Rafiq himself. No body had been found, no contact made, and no new clues had surfaced to confirm if he was alive or gone forever. The mystery remained painfully open. Years have passed since Rafiq went missing, but for his family, time has stood still. Each evening, as the sky darkens and the soft sound of rain touches the ground, his mother lights a candle by the window. It's her silent prayer, her quiet hope that one day he'll return, or that someone will bring her the truth. The flame flickers gently, as if waiting alongside her, holding on to a name that still carries weight in the town: Rafiq. The man believed to be involved has never been found. After he vanished from his rented room, there were no further sightings, no phone activity, and no paper trail. It's as if he dissolved into thin air, just like Rafiq. The police circulated his sketch across the country, but not a single confirmed lead came in. To many, that silence is the most chilling part. Theories still float around, whispered in homes, cafes, and even at the taxi stand where Rafiq once parked his car. Some believe he was targeted by a larger criminal group, one that uses drivers like him to smuggle things or people without them knowing. Maybe Rafiq noticed something he shouldn't have. Maybe he refused to be part of it. And maybe someone wanted to make sure he stayed silent. Others think it was deeply personal. They believe someone knew Rafiq's routine, his kindness, and his habit of never turning down a ride, even at odd hours. Maybe it was someone close, someone who planned it all, step by step. That's why it was so clean. No blood, No struggle, no noise, just a man, a taxi, and then silence. Even now, rainy nights make people uneasy. When the clouds gather and the wind carries the scent of wet asphalt, memories return. Those who knew Rafiq remember his smile, his quiet nature, and how he always helped others. His absence left more than a mystery. It left a space that has never been filled. If you know anything, no matter how small it seems, it could change everything. Maybe it's just a face you saw, a strange jacket, a car out of place. Sometimes solving a case like this begins with a single voice. And maybe, just maybe, that voice is yours. Story number 9. He seemed like the kind of person no one would ever suspect. Friendly to his neighbors, always polite in conversation, and the first to offer help when someone needed it. For 10 years, he lived a quiet life on a calm street, blending in perfectly with the community. But behind his calm face was a truth that no one could have imagined. He was living a double life, hiding a darkness that stretched across an entire decade. His name didn't raise alarms. He wasn't on any watch list. He had no criminal record. In fact, he worked a steady job, attended local events, and even cared for a stray dog he found in his backyard. People called him dependable, gentle, and respectful. But while the town slept peacefully, he was out hunting. His crimes started in the early 2000s. The first victim was a young man who went missing after work. The police thought he had run away, or maybe met with an accident. Then months later, another person vanished. This time it was a woman walking home from her job at a diner. At first there seemed to be no pattern. Different ages, different backgrounds. Some were students, others were workers, and a few were people no one really kept in touch with. Each time someone disappeared, the town mourned quietly and waited for answers. But none came. There were no suspects, no witnesses, and no obvious clues left behind. The fear slowly grew, but suspicion never reached him. He didn't look like the type of person who could hurt anyone. Even his own family was convinced he was just a quiet man who liked to keep to himself. They never saw the signs. There were no violent outbursts, no troubling behavior, just silence and a steady routine. He would leave home early, come back on time, and keep everything neat and in order. No one ever thought to question him. The truth remained hidden for years, buried beneath layers of trust and normalcy. But it was always there, waiting. As the bodies added up, the city remained unaware that the killer they were searching for had been right in front of them the whole time. The first known victim was a young woman named Lisa Crawford. She was 23 years old, working a night shift at a local grocery store. Lisa had dreams of becoming a teacher and was saving up for her college tuition. On the night she disappeared, she had just finished her shift and was seen walking toward the parking lot. She never made it to her car. Her purse was found on the ground, untouched. There were no signs of a struggle, no witnesses, and no security footage. That captured what happened next. Her family reported her missing the next morning. At first, the police treated it as a possible voluntary disappearance. There was no evidence of a crime, and Lisa had no history of running away. Friends and co-workers described her as responsible and cheerful. But without clues, the case slowly faded from the headlines. What no one knew then was that Lisa wasn't the only one. 3 months later, a man named Corey Nelson, age 31, vanished while jogging in a nearby park. He was a nurse at the city hospital and often ran after work to clear his head. His phone was later found near a wooded trail, screen cracked, battery dead. No signs of a robbery, no footprints, and no witnesses. Again, the disappearance was treated with caution, but not immediately linked to anything sinister. As more people went missing, a subtle pattern started to form. All the victims lived or worked within a certain radius. They were often alone when last seen and disappeared without a trace. Different ages, different professions, but always near the same zone. Some vanished from the same road, others from nearby parks or parking lots. It was as if someone was watching, waiting for the perfect moment to strike, and then leaving without leaving behind a single piece of evidence. Despite growing concern among families and communities, the police didn't connect the dots right away. They saw each case as isolated. There was no evidence, no connection between the victims, at least none they could see at the time. The thought that someone might be behind all of them was not yet a serious theory. The killer continued unnoticed, hiding in plain sight. He studied his surroundings, learned patterns, and struck only when the moment was just right. Each crime was careful, quiet, and quick, and every time, he made sure there was nothing left behind. He lived on the same quiet street for more than a decade, a small single-story house with a trimmed lawn and neatly painted shutters. Neighbors waved to him as he watered his plants or took out the trash. He always responded with a polite nod or a soft smile. There was nothing unusual about him. In fact, many people thought he was one of the nicest men on the block. He held a steady job at a local hardware store, where he was known for being helpful and patient with customers. On weekends, he sometimes volunteered at the community center, helping set up tables or passing out flyers. People described him as quiet but kind. He didn't talk much, but when he did, he seemed thoughtful. Parents felt safe letting their kids walk past his house. Elderly neighbors trusted him enough to ask for help carrying groceries. No one ever imagined that behind that friendly face was someone hiding a terrible secret. His calm routine was what made him invisible. Every morning he left the house at the same time. He went to work, returned home in the evening, and spent his nights watching TV or reading in his front room. He never missed garbage day. He kept his grass short. He smiled just enough, but never too much. He didn't attend loud parties or bring strangers around. He was forgettable in all the right ways. But inside that house, in a locked room no one ever saw, he kept his trophies. Small things from each victim. A necklace, a piece of clothing, sometimes even a photo. These objects weren't scattered or hidden carelessly. They were carefully arranged, almost like a shrine. To the outside world, he was a polite neighbor. But to himself, he was building a private world that no one knew about. The trophies weren't just reminders. They were proof, in his mind, of his power. He revisited them, touching each one, remembering the moment he took it. They gave him a sense of control, something he never showed in public. These dark rituals gave him confidence that he could keep doing what he was doing without being caught. His clean appearance and friendly behavior helped him stay a step ahead. Suspicion never landed on him, not even once. As long as he kept his mask in place, he believed no one would ever see what he truly was. It had been nearly 10 years since the first victim was found. Over that time, each case had seemed disconnected, scattered across different cities with different methods used. But in the final crime, something changed. He had always been careful, always cleaned the scene, always wore gloves, always destroyed anything that could link him back. But this time, he was in a hurry. He didn't realize the storm that was coming, both outside and in the investigation. The mistake was small, so small that it might have gone unnoticed if not for a fresh pair of eyes. A single fiber caught on the victim's clothing. A trace of something unfamiliar, something that hadn't shown up in any other cases. It didn't match what investigators expected, but it was enough to raise suspicion. A new detective had joined the task force, someone young, patient, and determined. She had been going through cold cases when she noticed a pattern that no one else had pieced together before. A certain way the victims were left, a specific type of injury that was too precise to be random. She pulled records, photos, autopsy reports, and old evidence that had been boxed away for years. With new tools available, forensic teams began retesting items from previous scenes. Advances in DNA technology had changed everything. Samples that were once too damaged or too small were now usable. Bit by bit, pieces started connecting. An old cigarette butt from one scene, a partial fingerprint from another, then a tiny trace of blood under a victim's fingernail that didn't match anyone in the database, until now. The lab ran the test again and again to be sure. It was a direct match to someone who had never been a suspect before, the quiet man with the neat lawn and calm smile. He had no criminal record. No one had ever reported him for anything suspicious. But the DNA didn't lie. The pattern of his crimes finally unfolded like a map, and investigators could see how long he had been getting away with it. Once arrested, he didn't fight. He didn't run. He simply looked at the officers and said nothing, as if he had known this moment would come. His decade-long game had ended, not with a scream or a chase, but with a single overlooked mistake. The confession didn't come easily. He sat through long hours of questioning, silent at first, his face unreadable, The detectives took their time, presenting him with evidence one piece at a time. His fingerprints, the trace DNA, surveillance footage placing him near one of the victims. Eventually something cracked. He leaned forward, his voice quiet and emotionless, and said, "You already know. What more do you need?" From there, it all poured out. He didn't just admit to the murder they had arrested him for. He started listing others, cases that had gone cold years ago, victims that were never connected to him. He remembered every detail, where it happened, what they said, how he felt in those moments. Some names he gave weren't even in the system as missing persons yet. Investigators had to pull files from different departments and match his words with real cases. It was like putting together a puzzle, and he held all the missing pieces. The reason behind the killings was even more disturbing. There was no money involved, no revenge, no deep personal motive. When asked why, he simply said it made him feel like he had control. He explained that he liked knowing people didn't suspect him. He walked among them, smiled at neighbors, waved at police patrols, even volunteered in his community, all while carrying the weight of his crimes without ever showing a crack. The families of the victims were contacted one by one. Some had lived for years without answers, not knowing what happened to their loved ones. For them, the news brought a wave of emotions, grief, pain, anger, but also relief. At least now they knew the truth. The wait was over. The stories they had been afraid to hear were now real, and they had a name to attach to their loss. His own family couldn't understand what had happened. To them, he had always been quiet but kind, a man who kept to himself but never showed signs of violence. When the news came out, they were shocked. They tried to make sense of it but couldn't. The man they had trusted, lived with, and loved had lived a double life. One side was calm and normal, while the other side was something darker than they could ever imagine. The courtroom was silent when the final sentence was read. He was given life in prison without the possibility of parole. No chance to walk free again. For the families sitting there, it brought a measure of justice, but not peace. Nothing could return their loved ones. The courtroom might have closed its doors on the case, but for many the pain remained wide open. Even after his confession and conviction, questions lingered. How did he manage to live a double life for so long? How did someone who smiled at neighbors, helped carry groceries, and played the role of a normal citizen hide such darkness? People who knew him described him as polite, soft-spoken, and even helpful. No one had ever suspected him, not once. And that thought still sends shivers down the spine of those who shared a street, a handshake, or a moment with him. Some investigators believe he didn't tell the full story. They think there are still victims out there, still missing, still unnamed. The timelines have unexplained gaps. There are locations he visited where bodies have never been found. His cold and calculated methods suggest he may have been even more active than he admitted. New cold cases are quietly being reviewed behind the scenes, hoping for a DNA match or a clue that ties back to him. Criminologists and profilers now study his case to learn how to spot patterns like his sooner. His ability to blend in is being used as a lesson, showing that, with the isolation of the cabin, made it increasingly difficult to locate any new clues. But every lead, no matter how small, kept them pushing forward. Emma's family, still desperate for answers, clung to the hope that someone would find her, alive, or at least with some understanding of what had happened. After days of relentless searching in the bitter cold, the rescue teams finally made a breakthrough. The snow had accumulated so thickly around the forest, the cabin was nearly impossible to spot from a distance. The men and women in the search party had already grown weary, but their determination kept them going. Every step through the snow seemed like it could be the one to lead them to an answer. And then it happened. A glimmer of hope, buried beneath the layers of frost, appeared in front of them. The cabin. As the search team approached the cabin, they noticed something eerily silent about the place. There were no signs of activity, no smoke coming from the chimney, and no footprints around the perimeter. It was as though time had stopped, and the cabin had been forgotten by the world. Upon closer inspection, they saw that the door was ajar. The harsh winds had knocked the door slightly open, allowing the snow to seep inside. But the stillness was unsettling. Inside, the scene that greeted the searchers was chilling. Emma's body was found sitting in a chair, frozen in place, her face pale and expressionless. She was slumped slightly to one side, her hands resting in her lap. It was as if she had simply been waiting for someone to find her. The air inside the cabin was frigid, the temperature having dropped so low that her body had become encased in ice. The shock of her discovery sent waves of disbelief through the search team. They had expected to find a trace of Emma, perhaps a sign of her struggle to survive, but nothing could have prepared them for this sight. There were no signs of trauma or injury on her body, which made the discovery all the more perplexing. How had she ended up like this? How had she frozen to death in such an isolated spot? There were no signs of any struggle, no sign of forced entry into the cabin, and no indication that anyone had been with her when she died. It was as if Emma had sat there, alone, waiting for death to claim her. The search team immediately called in the authorities, knowing that what they had just uncovered was far beyond what they had expected. This was no ordinary missing persons case. It was now a crime scene. But the questions only multiplied. Why had Emma ended up in such a remote place? Why was there no sign of her leaving the cabin or trying to find help? How had she ended up alone, freezing to death in such a remote, isolated cabin? The discovery of her frozen body raised more questions than answers, leaving everyone involved in the case grasping for a solution that just wasn't yet clear. As detectives arrived at the scene, they were immediately struck by the unnerving stillness of the cabin. The lack of struggle, the absence of any sign of forced entry, and the eerie silence raised an immediate sense of discomfort. Despite the frozen state of the woman's body, there were no obvious signs of foul play or injury. Everything seemed too calm, too undisturbed. Her body was seated neatly in a chair, and it appeared as though she had simply sat down, resigned to the cold, waiting for something, or perhaps nothing at all. The cold atmosphere of the cabin only seemed to intensify the mystery. It was an isolated place, surrounded by thick trees and miles of untouched snow. The location itself suggested that the woman had either chosen to come here of her own accord or had been brought there against her will. But why? What had driven her to this remote spot? The detectives carefully examined the room, looking for any clues that could explain what had led to her death. The interior was barren, with little more than the basic furniture necessary for survival. There was no indication of a struggle, no sign of any attempt to fight off an intruder or escape. The absence of footprints outside the cabin raised another troubling question. Had she been there for days, or was this a recent disappearance? It was clear to the investigators that something felt wrong. The lack of disturbance made the scene all the more unsettling. The woman's body showed no outward trauma, yet there was something deeply unnatural about the circumstances of her death. The chilling temperature and frozen condition of her body suggested that death had occurred slowly, and perhaps it was the slow passage of time in that desolate cabin that took her life. The detectives couldn't shake the feeling that they were looking at something much more complicated than just an isolated incident. The untouched, pristine nature of the cabin was unnerving. It was as if time itself had frozen. Nothing about this scene seemed to align with the natural progression of events. A careful examination of the woman's solitary, accidental death. As the detectives probed deeper into the woman's life, their suspicions turned to someone she knew, a person who had been in the cabin before. It wasn't a random passerby or an anonymous stranger. It was someone with a connection to her, someone whose presence seemed to loom over the case. The initial interviews with friends, neighbors, and acquaintances hinted at a strained relationship, one with unspoken tension and unresolved issues. A few individuals mentioned that she had recently received unsettling phone calls from someone who had once been very close to her, a past relationship that she had kept quiet about. The plot thickened as investigators uncovered details from the past that had been carefully hidden. Old documents, letters, and photographs found within the cabin hinted at a long-forgotten secret. It wasn't just an ordinary relationship. There was a history of manipulation, control, and even threats. These discoveries began to paint a different picture of the woman's life, one that involved more than just her time in the cabin. Her past was more complicated than anyone had realized, and the pieces of this hidden life began to emerge, shedding light on motives that had been buried for years. As the investigation progressed, the truth started to become clearer. The woman's connection to the person in question had been far more significant than originally thought. The cold, calculated nature of her death hinted that it was not a random tragedy, but something much more deliberate. The unsettling realization began to set in. The person who had once been close to her may have been the very one who had ultimately sealed her fate. The layers of this complex and disturbing case were just starting to unravel, and the answers seemed to lie in the unresolved, buried secrets from the past. The case ultimately reached its conclusion, but it left behind an unsettling emptiness. The woman's death was officially ruled as a homicide, but the killer remained shrouded in mystery. Despite the diligent efforts of investigators, certain aspects of the case continued to evade clear answers. The lack of concrete evidence linking the killer directly to the crime left a lingering sense of uncertainty in the minds of everyone involved. It was as if the answers were just out of reach, hidden within the walls of the cabin or buried in the chilling silence of the cold. Though the woman's death was no longer dismissed as a mere accident or a result of natural causes, the lack of resolution left a dark shadow hanging over the case. The investigators' findings pointed to a deliberate act, but without the final piece of the puzzle to confirm the identity of the perpetrator, there was a sense of unfinished business that would never quite fade. The mystery of the cabin remained unresolved, as if the walls themselves held on to its secrets, unwilling to let them be uncovered. For those who had been involved in the investigation, the haunting image of the frozen body in the cabin never quite left their thoughts. The cold, isolated setting, the stark atmosphere, and the way the discovery had been made all played on their minds long after they had left the scene. Each investigator walked away with a sense of lingering discomfort, as though they had come so close to uncovering something important, only to be stopped by an invisible force. The case had become more than just an investigation. It had become a haunting reminder of how much can remain hidden, even in the most seemingly obvious places. The cabin, now a forgotten part of the past, continued to stand alone in the wilderness, with the secrets of that day buried beneath the snow and the chilling silence that followed. The woman's story remained unfinished, her killer still unknown. And though time would go on, the unanswered questions about her death would continue to linger in the cold air, forever reminding those involved that sometimes some mysteries may never be solved.